Before we get started, I just want to say that Rivers of the Mind is not meant to condone or promote the use of any drugs, illicit or otherwise. Thank you. Something felt weird, but I couldn't place my finger on what was causing it. Do you mind if I make myself some coffee?
Be my guest. Just don't use the creamer in the metal tin, please.
As I stood up and walked towards the kitchen, I tried to understand my surroundings. Something was not on. You could even say off. I knew that viscerally. I could sense that something from my brain had been stolen from me. Cautiously, I shifted from English into the mushroom language. At once appeared two ghosts, leering with suspicion as I became visible to them. I was another one of the test subjects, they thought. Probably seeing the look of terror on my face, Dr. Whitebalm grew worried. Quickly, I darted into the language of the cedar tree from the field, then into the language of the grass, until I finally reached the language of the white flower in John's mind. Immediately, everything made sense. The memory of our conversation had been stolen from me, and an untrue one placed in its planted in its place. A distant giggling came from the ceiling and the walls. The spirit of the flower seemed to have put down roots there, and was enjoying the chaos it brought. As I grew more and more on edge, Dr. Whitebalm's emotions seemed to mirror my own. I didn't recall what we were talking about, only that the conversation I thought I remembered was not a conversation either of us had ever truly had. The real memory had been stolen from our brains. Taking advantage of the language's temporal looseness, I slid backwards through my memories, until I could see the same two ghosts from before, crouched down with John behind Dr. Whitebalm's round wooden dining room table. The teenager in the gray, spelled with an A and not an E in this timeline, hoodie, watched from the side, listening in on Dr. Whitebalm while she tried to figure out what I saw during the explosion. Up above, a miniature version of John clutched the sides of a hanging fluorescent light fixture and shook it back and forth. Relieved, if not even more confused than I'd been before, I snapped back into the present. Dr. Whitebalm stared forward blankly, her eyes wide and mouth frozen agape. Unwittingly brought into the language of white flowers with me, she had watched helplessly as all timelines flashed by her at once, all possible presents running together in a paralyzing chaos, an infinite and writhing tangle of memories so impossibly dense that she had not even the remotest sense of what she was or who she was for what had seemed like an eternity. I pulled her into English. The junctions between her nerves and her muscles suddenly snapped back into place, and her mind returned to its default perception of reality. Heart racing, she collapsed back into the couch, and, lost in an overwhelmed stupor, she struggled to digest what she had observed. The mysteries of the universe, which had been expanded and elaborated on through the voices of plant languages through which I carried her, collapsed crudely into the confines of English, quantum physics, and calculus, all of which seemed altogether inadequate to chart the impossibilities of what she had witnessed. Her worried eyes met mine, her jaw locking back against her teeth, and her brow wrinkling with vaguely defined uncertainty.
Did you do that to me?
We stared at each other, our distrust of one another stubbornly resisting its gradual dissolution. I poured myself a cup of coffee and nodded, slowly and uncertainly. You asked me a question, but the flowers made us forget. You wanted to know about the explosion, I said to Dr. Whitebalm, sipping my coffee quietly. A language that sounded like a shivering tree filled my chest. It spread through my arms and into my brain like a gentle wind before a storm. Coffee seemed like a nice plant. If I closed my eyes, I could see it. Industrious, practical, not altogether intelligent, but persistently friendly. Another sip and the shivering intensified. I felt awake, vigorously awake.
I don't remember that, but...
The white flowers, Ken. I jumped, spilling my coffee onto my shirt as screeching red lights filled the air, running in circles like a stampede of panicked cats. A booming, mechanical voice came over the intercom.
Attention! Horizon is now on lockdown. Please shelter in place. This is not a drill.
You can tell me later.
Had the white flowers done this? Were they trying to keep me from telling her about them? I rapidly switched to the mushroom language, careful to leave Dr. Whitebalm out of it, so I could see if the ghosts were still present. The teenager had vanished, but two of the spirits remained, inspecting John's now frozen face. I returned to English, stumbling across the room towards Dr. Whitebalm to see if I could help her with whatever she was doing, or if possibly she could help me feel a little bit less afraid of whatever was going on. Mostly the last one. Computers intimidated the beshroomed side of my brain. Hunched over her keyboard, Whitebalm rapidly tapped the bottom row of keys to wake up a set of 3 monitors. Frantically, she typed in a long and complex string of 27 characters and opened an application displaying security camera footage from around the base. What's going on?
Shh! Look!
On the screens, we watched soldiers creep through darkened hallways, made visible by wandering beams of pale white lights affixed to their weapons and occasional flashes of bright red from the alarms. Doctors rushed toward a door with a "No personnel beyond this point" sign, following a shell-shocked scientist with blood gushing from his nose, eyes, and ears. Dr. Whitebalm cocked her head and quickly logged out of the computer. Crouching down to reach below the desk, she retrieved a long, heavy lead apron and half forced it over me, followed by a protective face mask.
Step back a little bit. A bit further. Good.
Frantically, she searched through her drawers and pulled a small piece of metal from a bag marked radioactive, around which she clenched her fist. A flurry of calculations raced through her mind in a complex and exacting language of particles, waves, and momentums before she tapped the metal against the ground. It emitted a cascade of radio waves that bounced off the walls. A brief pause later, and she concluded.
Our hallway is clear. Should be for the next 3 to 5 minutes, I'd guess.
She tapped the metal again to get a clearer image.
Looks like they're checking the rooms for weapons.
Standing up, she put the metal back into its pouch and tore the apron off of me, throwing it to the side.
Come on, let's go.
So something happened to you and the...
Shh!
Oh, sorry, I was just...
Shh! Quiet!
Dr. Whitebalm cautiously opened the door and led me around a corner into a long, dark hallway. Holding her hand up, her skin glowed a deep yellow. I followed her carefully into the hallway, unable to see past the tiny point of light where the two of us stood.
With these people, you have to make sure you see things for yourself. Half of the debriefings are bullshit, especially since the accident.
I stared at her in silence, unsure of what to say or how to respond.
If anyone asks, Tell them I was showing you around when the alarms went off and we got lost. It's easy to do that around here. Don't show anyone what you showed me.
What?
Whatever you did back in that room. If you ever want to leave, do not show that to anyone.
I nodded. Pausing for a second, Dr. Whitebalm's hand pulsed softly. What are you...
Quiet! There. Okay. We're going to turn left in a little bit.
We kept walking. I stared, confused, at her hand.
I was using radio waves. It takes a lot of focus. I didn't mean to be harsh when I told you to be quiet.
It's okay. I understand.
Hey, you aren't supposed to be out here.
We got lost when the lights went out. What's going on?
Let them through.
Colonel Imes ordered. He peered over the shoulder of a doctor, who inspected a bleeding and shivering man huddled next to a stairway marked, "No trespassing." Dr. Whitebalm nodded politely, yet indifferently, to the security guards and strode into the stairway.
What's going on here, sir?
We don't know.
Whitebalm stood next to Imes and silently cleared her throat to get the colonel to explain.
He and his friend went down into the old lab to do a ghost hunt. They say someone attacked them.
They were attacked? With what? By who?
Well, that's where it gets weird. They say it was the guy from the sinkhole, and he did it with his mind. But Martin was with him when it happened, and he was still in bed having a seizure.
A seizure? I knelt down next to the doctor to get a better look at the patient. He was barely breathing, his trembling mouth bubbling with incoherent and slurred words. Blood gushed from his nose, his ears, and his eyes. His skin had turned a deep purple. A nurse tried to hold his arm still while another doctor administered some sort of drug from an intravenous drip. I shut my eyes to listen to the languages in his mind. There were 2 languages other than English. The first, the one just injected by the needle, looked like thick red plasma that bloomed outwards. When I let myself slide into it, all of my muscles relaxed into a gentle euphoria. Like I had become a hot air balloon, and I was floating into the sky. There were 2 words in this language. Yippee! And ah! The other language was the one from John's mind, the unending kaleidoscope of pyramids and spheres. The language manifested itself here as a mess of tangled, snake-like vines covered with blue flowers, vines wrapping themselves around the scientist's legs so that his veins felt like they could burst, wrapping around his chest and digging into his heart. The vines had penetrated and strangled layers upon layers of the brain, turning it into a bleeding and disjointed pulp. His consciousness, his English consciousness, no longer knew what he was or who he'd been before he was attacked. I opened my eyes.
Is she doing Reiki or something?
Asked one doctor.
What's wrong with him?
Demanded Dr. Whitebalm, ignoring the medical team's questions so as to ask her own, presumably much more important, questions.
We don't know. His blood pressure is through the roof. His veins are so tight that he's starting to bruise. We think it might be poison.
You shouldn't be anywhere near this right now.
Let me see John, I demanded. One of the doctors looked back at Colonel Imes.
He's fast asleep right now.
Only if someone goes with her.
Martin! Martin! Can you help over here for a second?
Another doctor, who'd previously been glaring very intently at a page of Sudoku, looked up from his book and rushed over to us. I stood up as Dr. Whitebalm moved in to ask the man in the suit more about the incident. Martin led me away from the scene.
My name is Dr. Jules, by the way. Nice to meet you,
he said, as if to remind me not to call him Martin. The faintest hint of white flowers still lingered in his brain. My shoulders grew tense with worry and fear as the memory of seeing the shattered universe with the white flowers wished to create shivered through my brain. What do you think about all this? He grimaced, torn between expressing his real fears and maintaining professional detachment.
Well, it's certainly unsettling, but I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. There's a lot of chemicals in the old lab, which is why we don't go
pulled him
in
into
there.
the alcohol
I'm
language
sure
which I'd heard earlier that day. He stumbled, wondering why he felt so drunk all of a sudden. And suddenly not giving as much of a fuck about telling me what he thought. I mean, his thoughts were important, right? He was a fucking doctor. People should listen to him. His vision started swirling, and his stomach started to burn with a nauseated fire. I imagined.
Oh, baby, I mean, it's been weird here since the election. I mean the accident. And it creeps me the hell out they'd say Joe would attack him, 'cause, I mean...
John?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, he was all like...
The doctor awkwardly flung one limp-wristed hand up to his chest as he made a face to imitate John convulsing. Did anything happen before John had the seizure? He felt like it would be too insane to tell me. He'd sound like a nutcase. I pulled him more insistently into the alcohol language. His knees grew weak and his eyes started to flutter.
Fuck! Did I think I need to lay down or something. Oh, God.
He looked me over, confused. Did anything happen before he had the seizure?
Yeah, like, I heard this voice, Ben. It was so weird. I've been trying to tell everybody, but I'm just scared. I mean, what if he did it, Man, fuck medical school. Did I ever tell you what I really wanted to do? I wanted to be a cryptographer. I wanted to solve number puzzles and spy and shit. But then the fucking Soviet Union had to collapse. Assholes.
You heard a voice? He started to feel like he could vomit, so I returned him to English. He stumbled. Suddenly not drunk, he looked around, puzzled. You were saying you heard a voice. He squinted, embarrassed, trying to search for a medical explanation for what he'd just experienced.
Crazy, right?
What kind of voice, doctor? I half spat out, awkwardly clenching my words so as to not sound overly demanding.
Like, almost a kid's voice? Or maybe older than that, I don't know. Teenager, maybe? It was weird.
The white flowers. I knew it right then and there. They had attacked him. I felt certain of it. A few steps from John's room and I could see his comatose form in the darkness through the slits in the blinds. The warring languages in his mind had been overshadowed by something new, something fearsome and domineering. A silence. A silence that thought, spoke, dreamed, and decided, without words. A language, a sentience with one voice, completely and eternally silent, like the sound you would hear inside your ears if you were immersed entirely in a pool and left to dream. An incredibly loud silence through which nothing could pass. I could not see into John's emotions, or the doctor's, or my own. There were no emotions, no traces of wandering thoughts. There was nothing but silence, blank, sleeping silence. The white flowers were covering their tracks.
How do you know him?
I glanced back at him, uneasy yet growing increasingly bored. He's a friend.
His blood work says he was on LSD. Do you know anything about that?
I glanced back at him, stoically. That's strange. I walked closer to the bed, and the uneasy coolness of the silence drained my heart of feeling, or meaning, or concern, leaving me only quieted. Not quite at rest, but quiet. The only word. The only thing that kept me from falling asleep in the silence was the pounding overstimulation of the day. Its aggravating assault on my senses, which grew dimmer and dimmer as the silence enveloped me. You don't think he did it, do you? I asked the doctor, my own words barely audible to me. Maybe I didn't even say them, but I didn't care.
I mean, he's been here the whole time.
I could hear him say in a muffled voice. I stared back at him. I had to remind myself what Dr. Whitebalm said, that I couldn't trust these people. But perhaps I couldn't trust John, or her, or even myself. And my own intuitions. My own sense that John couldn't have been responsible, even as I realized that he could have done that to those poor scientists. Perhaps the white flowers already controlled me. All these thoughts, ordinarily terrifying, floated through my mind atop the silence, over my head like ships on top of oceans. Here in this silence, I didn't really care. I stepped away from the room, having found more questions than answers. A tear formed in the corner of my eye, but I tried to hold on to that sense that I didn't really care, that I was at peace. Another step back towards the door. A tear slid from the corner of my eye down alongside my nose, meeting the surface of my lips. A stretcher came down the hallway. A man screamed. I stepped out from the room, watching the doctors roll the scientist into a hospital room. One by one, tears stained the sides of my cheeks as feelings slowly returned to my body. And I hated it. Shutting my eyes, I returned to the silence. It embraced me like an old friend, and I teetered on the edge of unconsciousness. Any further into the silence, and I would have fallen fast asleep. I was kept awake by one singular fact. There was no safe place for me to hide. The white flowers had John, and they would use him to kill me. Or worse.
I'll take a shot for the friends I'll never see again. Take another shot for the memories forgotten. I need another drink for the ones that I remember, and one for every year that we tried to kill each other. And I will drink again for the cities that burn, whiskey for the tragedies my state around the world, gin for the sins inflicted by the mad, the ones who commit it and those who don't understand. I will drink till I'm sick of all of the alcohol. Drink because I know that I have almost no control. Every senseless death weighs heavy on my heart, but it's a living with their bigotry and ignorance that is tearing me apart.
My insides are all torn up. Been keeping these screams inside my guts. With every picture, every image, every song I dare to finish. Every time my friends remind me, every time that I remind me, I can feel it in my lungs. A scream that just goes on and on. When friends ask me how I am, they do not see the dam that will surely soon erupt from the cracks that have corrupted it. With every picture, every image, every song I dare to finish. Every time my friends remind me, every time that I remind me, I can feel it in my lungs. A A scream that just goes on and on. A scream that's perfectly encapsulated why I need to be sedated before I take a blade to rate it. Cut out words to be translated. Hopeless romantics who quite ill-fated. And I'll see you on the other side, I'll say, plunging this silly night. But I just sigh, or get real quiet. Another piece of me has died inside.